The world is more than five, declares the president of Turkey from the podium of the Anatolian Diplomatic Forum. Recep Tayyip Erdogan makes it clear, the era of a unipolar world is in the past. The guests of the forum, leaders of African countries, representatives of the Middle East, and among the participants, the president of Azerbaijan, are in agreement with him. Elmira Aliyev also shared her vision of the new world order this week. A forum with the participation of international experts was held at Ada University. Relations with the Trump administration, the situation in the Middle East, the war between Russia and Ukraine. There were many questions, but they all boiled down to the fact that the world will never be the same again. But what it will be like in the coming years is being decided right now. And Azerbaijan plays an important role in this process. We will discuss this in the program Special on Saturday. My name is Elmira Musazadeh. Hello. Today we have Ramiz Yunus, a political scientist, in the studio. Ramiz, dear, hello. Glad to welcome you.
Good day, Elmira. Me too.
Earlier with you at the WADA Forum, your question concerned the head of state, concerned the new White House administration, and specifically the administration of Donald Trump, the Republican administration. To what extent does the White House administration influence overall, or even, I would say, determine the processes occurring in our region?
Well, of course, with the change of power in the White House, which today affects the entire global geopolitics, willy-nilly, this reflects on the whole world, including our South Caucasus. And therefore, it is by no means accidental that when there is an opportunity to communicate directly with the head of state, one should take advantage of these moments. And this is already the second time I have such an opportunity. Last year it was at the Shusha Forum, and in Shusha I asked him a similar question, but it was on the eve. And then he diplomatically tried to explain, to share his experience, 20 years of it. And this is very important for experts, to listen directly to politicians of such a level. Their vision of working with both Republicans and Democrats. And then he, diplomatically, of course, made it clear that they are closer, of course, to the Republicans. And today, now that the Republicans are in power, I was already interested to hear directly from the source how these almost 3 months have been, and whether his hopes have been justified in this sense, and what he sees as the main risks for Azerbaijan and directly for our region. And of course, he clearly stated that if we are talking about the anti-Azerbaijani microclimate in the American media or from official structures like the State Department, then of course, we no longer hear that. And that is already pleasing. Well, as you can understand, this cannot happen just like that. So someone working in this direction from the American side, from the administration, they are surely taking certain actions. Well, it's a tango. It's always for two. So someone from this side, from the Azerbaijani side, is also surely working. And this was emphasized by the head of state. And he said that yes, at a fairly solid high level, our teams, that is the administration of the President of the USA and the US administration, they are indeed working. The administration of the President of Azerbaijan supports this contact, and we can already see this even despite the fact that a priori, seemingly without prior agreement, these administrations preemptively, even Azerbaijan, went ahead of them. These confrontations with USAID, with Voice of America, with Radio Liberty, and everything that the Trump administration is undertaking within the country. Before this, Azerbaijan undertook within its own state, which also cannot please us. And all those people who are directly working in this direction. Therefore, yes, of course, I can, in response to your question, I can say that today there is enormous potential. And this was emphasized by the head of state, specifically in response to my question, so that we could properly build relations between Azerbaijan and the United States of America, taking into account the geopolitical processes, the turbulence on the planet, and directly in our geography, including the Russian-Ukrainian war, the Middle East, Iran, and the South Caucasus. All of this today requires certain logistics and a new order of measures. The role of Azerbaijan directly in this geography is being revived. And it is very important that this understanding reaches the new administration in the White House, and I assess the ongoing processes quite positively.
Speaking about the understanding of Azerbaijan's role in general, when talking with American officials, they admit that they generally lack information about our region, because many in the USA are accustomed to considering this region as a zone of Russian influence. And there is some truth to this because based on your interview, as I was preparing for our broadcast, I watched your interview where you noted that after the Cold War, the Clinton administration, let's say, did not put enough pressure on modern Russia, so to speak, and did not establish, let's say, a zone of influence, a sphere of influence in our region. How much of a desire do the United States have now, let's say, to be more active in our region, and how much capability and influence do they have to do this now?
Well, as for the capabilities, they certainly have all these capabilities today. They have always had them. They had them even after the collapse of the Soviet Union, when the Cold War ended and when the Soviet Union fell apart. And it was then, as I believe, that the most significant geopolitical mistake was made by the United States of America and their allies as a whole in the West, who simply decided to rest on their laurels. That is, it seemed like a unipolar world emerged, the second pole disappeared. But that's not how it works. Because you see, political science is still a science, and geopolitical processes, they don't happen by themselves. The fact that after World War I, the Treaty of Versailles appeared, and it was a social demand, the rise of Hitler. A social demand because this disgraceful Treaty of Versailles, from the perspective of the German people, led to the fact that this revanchism was in demand, and certain forces played on this, leading to the start of World War II. And therefore, it is precisely the incompleteness of this theme, among other things. But again, for better or worse, until 1991 it worked, and the multipolar world after World War I turned into a bipolar world after World War II. Well, so the year 1991 ended, this theme concluded, so how to proceed further? And we, a priori, simply accepted a unipolar world, but without, so to speak, its legal formalization. Then it just worked by default, you see? And therefore, over the last 35 years, this has slowly but surely rolled to where it has ended up. That is the very dead end. And as a result, we saw blood across the post-Soviet space along the entire perimeter of the Russian border. It started with our Karabakh, we remember, and also the Georgian issue, Abkhazia, the Tskhinvali region, Transnistria. And then more with 2008, August with Georgia, then 2014, Crimea, Donbass. And this resulted in full-scale aggression. So these are all links in one chain to understand this and where it might lead. Therefore, the Americans have resources. They have them. And even those resources are available to Europe to a certain extent, especially in the context with America. But they did not engage with these resources. Europe rested on its laurels under the umbrella of the USA, having money and all the opportunities. It rose to a high level. And then Donald Trump comes along. If Donald Trump hadn't come in 2016, another Donald Trump would have come. In 2016, he was still an unprepared politician because he came from business and he didn't understand what the United States of America was. These geopolitical processes, there was a personnel shuffle and much more. And this deep state, as they say, they threw him out, didn't give him a chance. Well, he is an ambitious person with a certain psychological profile. And all the forces that stood behind him decided to take this revenge. They prepared for 4 years, and it seems they prepared both financially and in terms of personnel. But now, as things move forward, you see, the resistance is, again, very strong. Sometimes wrong decisions are made. Regarding these tariffs, they pushed it to the point where he had to retreat, which he did not plan. Because it's one thing, so to speak, as a deal tactic, to go all out, take a step back, and get the price you need. But when it affects the US national debt, when it crashes the stock markets, when it primarily hits the interests of those people who brought you to power, starting with Elon Musk himself, who lost almost $150 billion. So we begin to understand that it is very important for him to succeed internally, because if he does not succeed within his own country, it means he will not be able to push through what needs to be done externally, especially regarding China and the European Union. Because when we see today that he has taken a step back and they want to present it as if it were a great success, that this is his tactic, it does not concern China, it does not concern the European Union, because today the main trade war will be between these three centers, because they are the three main economies. And ultimately, we see today how even Europe is situationally making some kind of deal with China. Therefore, the resources are there. It's just a chess game. And in this chess game, it's very important to play the middle game correctly, because in a chess game, there is the opening, the middle game, and the end game. He has played the opening, and still, in chess theory, so to speak, such an opening might not even exist, because in chess there is the well-known Sicilian defense, the Spanish game, the Caro-Kann defense. But here, no one can say what kind of game Donald Trump is playing today, because it's one thing to sell a building and another to establish a new world order. Because in this new world order, everyone says there will be a bipolar world, just as you mentioned in your preambles. Or there will be a multipolar world. No one can say yet what it will look like, because these are precisely the types of global processes, especially the precursor to the Third World War. The Russian-Ukrainian war, from my point of view, is a precursor to the Third World War. When people ask me if there will be a Third World War, I say there won't be one. Because if it were to be the Third World War, the United States of America would have to be involved first and foremost. And China, the United States of America and China will do everything to avoid getting involved. And I'm not even mentioning Iran and everything else. Therefore, if today everything is being done to take advantage of this war, to push through their own goals, that's one thing. And then the world order will only appear after this is completed. And that's why you see different positions, different points of view, and there is resistance. Russia found itself in this triangle, and therefore it will play on this counter move. Both the Americans and the Chinese wish for Russia's glory. And in the 70s, if the Americans used, back then, a weak China against a strong Soviet Union, but today, on the contrary, they want to use a weak Russia against the same China. Russia understands this, and Russia is playing on this today. We are currently in this process. Therefore, it is very important to understand and accurately evaluate this process. And, of course, it is very important to understand where we ourselves are located. I mean, Azerbaijan and this nearby geography. Therefore, it is very important. It was important for me to participate in this forum, just like last year's. But this forum differed from last year's in that it included representatives from think tanks, political scientists, analysts, who are quite well known and, so to speak, authoritative. And in the corridors, we talked with many of them about these topics. And it was very important for everyone to ask a question, depending on the region where they are located, and to hear the president's answers. Therefore, of course, it is very important when such events take place. It was very important for me to participate from a professional standpoint. And now I understand that there are resources. In summary, I apologize for going into such detail across this whole spectrum. In summary, I can say that the Americans have resources. A simple question. Is Trump that person or not? We will see in the near future, because political will is needed. The resources are there, everything is there for this, and it seems like the processes indicate that if America wants, it can resolve this process in such a way as... The other thing is, he hasn't shown this will yet. He still, as you see, makes a statement, takes a step back, but it seems like the time allotted for engaging in show business is over. It's time to move on to real politics.
Speaking of real politics, but speaking of a new world order, if we consider the idea that the world will consist not of a single center of power, but of several many experts are discussing this, contemplating what the world will look like in the future. There is already talk about the power of the global south, about the power of Turkey itself, about the power of certain countries in Europe that may gain momentum, and so on. What do you think? What centers of power exist now if we talk about a multipolar world? Which ones might emerge? And with which of them should Azerbaijan interact more closely, considering the place where we are located?
You know, geopolitics. Geo means geography. Therefore, we need to understand the meaning of this word. Geography is both a plus and a minus. It's like in life, yes, parents. We don't choose our parents, and therefore we also don't choose our geography. And unfortunately, sometimes for 200 years, this geography worked as a minus, that is from the north and from the south. And they divided us for the last time in the Turkmenchay Treaty, and we ended up where we ended up. In the years 1820, we were allowed to be independent for 20 months. And even now, despite the fact that after 1991 we have been independent for 35 years, true independence only came to us when the flag was finally raised in Kankendi. And I am a happy person because I was fortunate enough to be photographed at that very place. For the first time in my life, I had never been there, and to find myself there. And that's why this is a very important moment. And this happened just recently. And so right now we have achieved true independence. We have become a sovereign state. And it is very important today to build on this foundation, the very state with a national idea that any state needs. That is, we had a national idea which is Karabakh. Moreover, it wasn't formally defined, it was mental. It is ingrained in us genetically. Yes, and we have achieved this. Now it is very important to build so that it doesn't lean like the Tower of Pisa, but stand straight. It is crucial to understand where our geography is, what processes are occurring in response to your question, and what we must do. Therefore, in this situation, of course, the foreign policy that Azerbaijan is pursuing today is the most, so to speak, professionally suitable. It precisely corresponds to the processes of equidistance and multi-vectorness. That is, we should not be pro-Russian, pro-Iranian, pro-Chinese, or pro-Western. We should be pro-Azerbaijani. We simply need to decipher what it means to be pro-Azerbaijani. We should then take a close look at what is happening in Ukraine today. The West has betrayed Ukraine. We need to recall where Mikhail Saakashvili is and what happened in 2008. The West betrayed Mikhail Saakashvili. The West betrayed Georgia. The West betrayed Moldova. The West also betrayed Azerbaijan at one time. That is to say, by betraying this left liberal ideology that they have been promoting for the past 30, 35 years after the collapse of the Soviet Union has hit a dead end. And this social ferment, which brought Donald Trump and the forces behind him, indicates that one ideology has failed. It's a catastrophe. And yet the second one is not yet defined, meaning extremism is always bad. Whether right or left, it's very good to be a centrist. I personally am a centrist by nature, and I see that Azerbaijan today, specifically Azerbaijan's position, it is precisely in the center. We are geographically in the center. Logistically, we are in the center. And therefore, politically, it is very correct to be in this situation, should there be a necessity, and China. As far as I have heard, the head of state will soon visit China on an official visit, and the European Union, which comes here to conclude a strategic partnership agreement with us, and Russia, which has not liked us for 200 years and does not like our independence, but is forced to reckon with it, and is forced to reckon with the fact that Russian troops have left from here, despite the fact that they planned for 5 years. And considering that they even brought a monument here, they plan to be here, to stay here forever, for sure. So they are also forced to reckon with this. And Iran, which has moved its troops to our border several times, must also reckon with this. And considering that we now have directly in this geography, and again, our allies in this geography, our number one strategic partner, Turkey. It is also in this geography. Our partner in the form of Pakistan, a nuclear power, is also in this same geography. And our relations with Israel, this also says a lot. Therefore, we are talking about the Middle East region. Therefore, 3 countries inside, 3 countries around. This is where we are inside. We are the leaders of this geography, with allies from this geography. Among these 3, we have Georgia. Regarding Georgia, the president of Azerbaijan also very skillfully and deeply deciphered these messages there. These messages are not only for friends, but also for Azerbaijan's adversaries. Because there were many such messages made, including even the case, or perhaps not related to our topic, but connected with the flag before the German president's visit to Azerbaijan. That is, these are all links in one chain, so it's necessary to use such forums to make these large-scale statements. And as we say, that's what it's done for. And it's very important to understand that today, what is happening in Georgia, and in Georgia, if before this, Georgia, during Saakashvili's time, was striving towards Europe. And the recent elections and the events happening there indicate that in Europe, they are still trying to destabilize the situation from within. And the Georgian society is already afraid of Russia since after 2008 and does not trust Europe either. The Ukrainian society is the same. Since 2014, they have gone through this. In Moldova, there is this division into 2 parts. And our society and our consolidation after the Second Karabakh War. And in principle, my presence here in your studio today, and my position, and the fact that today both our friends and our enemies see this, it says a lot about the conclusions Azerbaijan has drawn today, and individual politicians like myself have as well. And this gives a concrete result. It consolidates the nation. It gives a concrete result, Is Azerbaijan's position clear to everyone today? It's clear. Is it taken into account? It is taken into account. Is it loved? Is it liked? No. It is neither loved nor liked, but it is taken into account. And politics is not a matter of love. Here it's about pragmatism, strategic interests. It's the art of the possible, as Bismarck himself said. So let's demonstrate this art. I am very glad that my native Azerbaijan is demonstrating this well in this situation. Therefore, we must, of course, use our geography, which is very important, and remain equidistant. Strengthen our relations with all those who are interested in this geography and not get involved. This is not our war, neither there nor is it our war in the Middle East. Everything that is being stirred up today around Iran, that's for sure. We are not interested in this, of course. We are not interested in a full-scale war that might occur there, but I think there won't be a full-scale war as such there. Of course, they are being fully pressured right now. Well, right now, as we are talking, as far as I know, negotiations are taking place in Oman, and since they are happening, it means there is a desire to reach an agreement. So it's the same tactic, and if there is a desire to agree, it means that publicly we will hear one thing, but in real politics, everything will be done to reach an agreement. Therefore, we should be interested in ensuring that no destabilization occurs around us. And even regarding the relations between Turkey and Israel, it was the same on this topic. A question was asked, and the head of state very clearly stated that this is a topic that does not like publicity. This is a topic that should take place behind the scenes. I am very glad that it is happening behind the scenes. Azerbaijan is handling this situation very skillfully and confidently because both parties are our close friends and we are not interested in our friends clashing. We are interested in our friends becoming stronger while our enemies become weaker.
Absolutely. Even when talking about the relations between Azerbaijan and Israel, many politicians know that what we see is just the tip of the iceberg and much more is hidden beneath the surface. I think the same can be projected onto Azerbaijan's overall policy towards many countries and its foreign policy in general. But speaking of equidistance, the world is currently in a period of such turbulence. Sooner or later, this period will end. How long can such equidistance and impartiality be maintained, let's say? After all, history shows that sooner or later, all countries that tried to, let's say, play perhaps, speaking of, for example, China. Henry Kissinger wrote about this in his book on China, that China, during its period of weakness, tried to play on the contradictions of its rivals, and it was quite successful. It managed to do so on the contradictions of strong players. But at some point, the contradictions end, the rivals come to an agreement, and one has to make a decision. How likely is this scenario? How feasible is it now to be, let's say, undecided, if we refer to Dante?
If you are speaking from the perspective
of international politics.
One thing, Nijam, if we are speaking from the perspective of Azerbaijan, it's very different.
Let's consider these two cases.
Let me first try to speak from the perspective of Azerbaijan, because when there is a certain stability within any country, let's say we are talking about Azerbaijan now, that is recently. I have deciphered the position where Azerbaijan is, and it is the most advantageous in the current situation. Such a geopolitical situation is beneficial for us. Today, it occurs once in 100 years, but it is good. Today, tomorrow, the situation might be different. So we must be prepared for various force majeure scenarios. And just like in life, in everyday life, it's necessary to have some kind of safety cushion. If we speak purely in economic terms, it should be some money that should be available in case of any force majeure in the economic sphere or any force majeures around our geography. We must be prepared, because in financial terms, it is very important to be prepared. What is the stability of any state? The stability of a state is its armed forces, its economic component, and the right allies that are around you, and the geopolitical processes around you. You cannot control them, they can change. Therefore, you must always be prepared for this. So, what is good today, tomorrow, might just be a different situation. We need to be ready for this. As for other countries around us, you see a destabilized situation in Armenia, unrest in Georgia. There is unrest in Ukraine, unrest in Russia, unrest around Iran. There is not a single calm place around our geography. Therefore, naturally, this indicates that we must be fully prepared. So when journalists sometimes ask me why the borders are not being opened, this started during the pandemic, I say, today we are experiencing a political pandemic. I understand how difficult it is today in terms of social security for the Azerbaijani civil society. But if citizens are interested in preserving the success we have achieved today, for many this seems completely impossible. Because, let's be honest, I am one of those who openly admits this. We didn't know there was a minimum program and a maximum program. We accomplished the maximum program even though we weren't even prepared for the minimum program, you see, in this regard, because of what we were witnessing. It happened and how it went on for 26 years after the Bishkek Protocol, but we achieved it, we succeeded. So let's not repeat the mistakes. From 30 years ago, I am one of those who made these mistakes. Let's look at neighboring Georgia, where the same Mikhail Saakashvili is, who also understands that today a one-vector pro-Western approach. This policy led Georgia to this fiasco. Let's look at Ukraine, what's happening there. Therefore, this needs to be understood. When the situation is unstable in these regions and you don't know what the future might hold, and when today these meetings, negotiations regarding Ukraine are taking place, Trump's special representative is meeting with the Russian president for the third time. And it's still unknown how this will end, because there are clearly opposing positions from both Russia and Ukraine. And the president of Azerbaijan also responded to this question. He says, either I don't understand something in big politics, or when someone says Ukraine will have to give up, Ukraine will never give up on this. No Ukrainian politician will be able to do that, to go categorically. Just like Azerbaijan, no matter how much pressure was put on us, we also did not give up on this. We signed the Bishkek Protocol. We had no other options at that time. But by signing, we did not proceed to recognition. And Ukraine will never agree to this. If it cannot liberate them today, it means it will have to live with this thought, just as we did, and it will have to prepare for this. It means something will happen in that geography that will keep them in such a suspended state, the same state we were in. But we have drawn conclusions from this, and only the right strategy and its tactical implementation can lead to a concrete result. Therefore, it is necessary to closely monitor these geopolitical processes. Do not get involved, I emphasize again, and always be interested in the processes occurring with your friends and your adversaries, like those in Iran. Therefore, for example, we understand that Iran does not like us, but we are not interested in destabilizing it, because we understand that half of the population are ethnic Azerbaijanis, and how might this look in this geography? Therefore, all these processes are very important. And in response to your question, not to get involved, try to be stable, keep a distance. And so that when the Titanic pulls in small ships, even if there's a good captain and a good crew, boatswains and sailors, they still might not withstand it. So it's very important to be prepared for any force majeure that might occur with any Titanics around us.
Well, let's still hope that they won't happen. But speaking about the complexities in geography and generally about the social demand, returning to this topic now, and you have noted this in your interviews as well, it seems to me that it's clearly visible now, the rise of far-right nationalist forces, not only in the United States, but also throughout Europe, in Western countries, and generally around the world, I think. Such a surge is being observed now. Why now specifically? What has led to this? And how will this shape policy, and let's say the processes occurring in the most complex regions of the globe? How will this affect conflicts in Ukraine and, for example, in the Middle East?
Well, it always happens like this. Let's take America, for instance. I've been living in America for over 20 years now. And I understand that American society changes its administration every 8 to 12 years. Even the most ideal administration, the most successful president of America, in my opinion, was Ronald Reagan, who won the Cold War from 1981 to 1989. And then came Bush Sr., the former head of the Central Intelligence Agency. But despite this, in 1992, he had to give way to Bill Clinton, not a very successful or accomplished president. In the history of the United States of America, who made this very significant historical mistake. But at that time, American society was acting in the interests of the United States of America. Therefore, we must first understand the American mentality. Having lived there, I understand how the American political system works. And that this social demand led to these rights, and this Western system, the political system, through the same Marshall Plan after 1945, which led to modern Europe, these institutions that were created, I mean NATO, and then the European Union and other structures that began to form in one way or another. All of this was under the military, technical, and economic umbrella of the United States of America. And if the power in the United States of America shifts from a left, so to speak, ideology to a right ideology, then to some extent, this will also affect the same geography called Europe. And through these countries, through this same geography, it will influence the geography that Europe itself has been influencing for the past 30, 35 years with this ideology. And we also had this 30, 35 years ago, and it was also present in our geography. This was in Azerbaijan, in Armenia, in Georgia, and throughout the entire post-Soviet space. And simply when it fails at such a level, and it indeed has failed, only those countries win that did not wait for changes, this fiasco in the USA, but proactively prepared themselves. And besides Azerbaijan, no one else in the post-Soviet space has prepared for this. And precisely in the presence of conflict, which existed on our territory. That is, this conflict is also in Georgia, this conflict is also in Moldova, this conflict is also in Ukraine, and they're bet on left liberal forces, the political forces there in the West, does not allow them to solve this issue. When someone talks about democracy, about sovereignty, about human rights, and I am one of those who have always defended this, I suffered, you could say, emigrated because of it. But when I start asking them there after the Second Karabakh War, what happened if in 1992 you imposed the 907th Amendment against us? Back then Azerbaijan was democratic according to you, but you called us aggressors. Today you continue to do this. So it turns out that the theme of democracy, freedom of speech, and territorial integrity applies to Armenians, but not to Azerbaijanis, meaning there's some kind of double standard. Is this exactly how you do it? Now and further, and even more. That is, if Georgia follows in the wake of your narratives, your agenda, then that's good. If it suddenly realizes that after 2008 you start betraying them, then it begins to draw conclusions and it starts to repeat, to take. The example of brotherly, friendly Azerbaijan and Turkey, which adhere to a completely different policy, a centrist policy based on geography and their specific interests. Then you start to pressure. You pressure Turkey, you pressure Azerbaijan, and now you're pressuring Georgia. That's why the Azerbaijani president said, we will not let Georgia be offended. You just need to understand this. And when a bet is placed on one particular force, it leads to such a fiasco. In these countries, you just need to understand this. Yes, naturally, right? Today, the right wing is coming quietly. And this is not only in Hungary, not only in Slovakia. In Italy, it's a trend. But hopefully this trend does not repeat the same mistakes very well. So that both the left would move towards the center and the right would move towards the center. And this would correspond to modern geopolitical processes. But, you know, our desire alone is not enough. Therefore, as they say, the rescue of drowning people is the work of the drowning themselves. Therefore, we must look at our geography ourselves and choose allies wisely. And I remember when at some point the head of state said that our family is the organization of Turkic states. This is indeed the case. We also understand in the family that sometimes there are disagreements, but we always know that we will come to an agreement with our parents, with our brothers. But if in life you are looking for specific friends, those who are truly ready to stand up for you, not those who, like now in Ukraine, say beautiful words, we are ready to support you as much as needed. But for whom? For whom is the key question. Ukrainians need one thing. You need something completely different, and you have turned it into a testing ground, a second Afghanistan. In this geography, just as long as it doesn't spill over onto your territory. As a result, 10 million people have emigrated from Ukraine, nothing remains of this infrastructure, and it was the second state-forming territory in the Soviet Union, and today nothing is left of it. But I think they are already taking off their rose-colored glasses, and therefore it is no coincidence that the president of Ukraine pays great attention to personal relationships with the president of Azerbaijan and relations with Azerbaijan. And it is no coincidence that I have great success there on their territory, because I represent Azerbaijan. First and foremost, they are the United States of America. They understand this. It's just very difficult to get through to them, because before 2014, they weren't even interested in our problem until the roasted rooster pecked them. And now they have started to take an interest. That's why I always try to tell them, don't reinvent the wheel, Look at my native Azerbaijan and take it as an example.
I would like to touch a little on Europe itself here. The processes that are happening have in principle encompassed this turbulence. It has engulfed Europe, and if we compare, for example, the organization of Turkic states and Europe as such an entity, let's say, yes, the Turkic Council has more similar aspects. There are some ethnic values, cultural values, a shared history, common problems, so to speak, yes, that we shared in, for example, during the Soviet period and before that. Regarding Europe, there are still different cultures, different peoples, and now they seem to be expressing themselves most actively. We see complete disunity in the political establishment, and frankly speaking, in public life as well. That is, I don't think that Italians share the problems that, for example, Germans have today, or that Germans share the problems that Poles have today. After all, these are different countries that, yes, are understandably united by some common agreements and so on. But how long can this continue, remain like this? How long can Europe maintain its fellowship, its solidarity, let's say, in the coming year?
You know, what's the main thing? If the economy leads, followed by politics that's promising, if some kind of political ideology leads, followed by the economy, that's unpromising, because ideology can fail. Ideology can vary, be it communist, Nazi ideology, or the ideology present in the European Union today. They claim to be a Christian union, which is why they fundamentally do not accept Turkey. Albania plays no role in these structures. So we need to understand what is primary and what is secondary. And yes, of course, to unite initially, there must be some common values. And it's always easier for people to unite when they have some ethnic, cultural, religious, or linguistic closeness. In this regard, of course, the organization of Turkic states is predisposed to this. But agree, when I was working in the government, I remember that the first herald of this topic was the late Turgut Özal. And he then visited, he flew over all these Turkic-speaking states, and he arrived precisely in Azerbaijan. And there was this understanding back then. But now look, 35 years have passed, and only now is it beginning to take shape. And the difference, for example, between Anatolian Turkey and all the former Soviet Union republics, the Turkic-speaking ones, we can see how they differ, especially in terms of the fact that being pro-Russian, the informational centrism, first and foremost, as they call it, not the Russian world, yes, we see this trend continues, which comes from Moscow. They defend it, but the resistance has not yet reached the necessary level. Therefore, systematic approach is the most important thing in all matters. Whether it's about creating a state, there must be a systematic approach. There was the Soviet Union, for better or worse. There was a planned economy, ideology, informational policy, education, all under the USSR formed the Soviet person. Azerbaijan must today form its own, so to speak, systematic approach for Azerbaijan. As we say, yes, well, what is this? We must decode this. This is what is being formed with us now. And this should be in Turkey, in Azerbaijan, in Kazakhstan, in Uzbekistan, in all these countries. And when this is at a systemic level, brick by brick, that is the first stage. What I told you, the cultural, religious, linguistic, this is the foundation, so to speak. Yes, we are predisposed. But how to proceed further so that we can already rise to the first floor, to the second floor, so that we can talk about different topics in their studio like this. And we should be united by common values. And it is very important that, of course, the economy should lead the way. Pragmatism, because when the economic component is strong, then cultural, informational, educational, and everything else will work under this. And we can certainly turn the organization of Turkic states into a Klondike on the level of the European Union. Why is the European Union facing such a fiasco today? Because this struggle, these ideologies, is intensifying even more today. And it is not ready for force majeure situations. That's the challenge. Is there one today? Russia will succeed, and the toothlessness of the West and the indecisiveness of the United States of America will provide this opportunity. I see no prospects for NATO or the European Union. No one will strive for it. Today, I am one of those who wanted Azerbaijan to be in the European Union, Azerbaijan to be in NATO today. Ask me, I am categorically against it. And why would I need it? Because NATO is the second army. NATO has the Shusha Declaration with Azerbaijan, which is much stronger than Article 5. So we already have a real NATO, not like theirs. Why does Ukraine need it? And they have included it in their constitution. And this means the approach was mistaken. As for the European Union's economic component, today we have relationships where 10 or 12 EU countries have strategic relations with Azerbaijan. Therefore, naturally, if this cultural, religious, political component, it is formalized at a systemic level if we can create sufficiently strong projects, economic projects for this. And this logistics will work as a single unified mechanism, and moreover, it will start. China itself will get involved. This will pass through us and reach Europe. Of course, this will provide a certain level of fulfillment for our institute, for this structure. The other thing is we cannot become hostages of this institute either. We must always be in any institutes to such a level that these institutes do not dominate us, just as Brussels today has come into conflict with many national entities, such as Hungary, Slovakia, and Italy. And therefore, this contradiction between the left forces in Brussels and the right ones in certain countries leads to this antagonism in this geography. Therefore, it is necessary to understand and clearly know where the red lines are, beyond which a state should not go, even if it is part of some structure.
Why, in general, did these European institutions not succeed, while the Western world as a whole was very proud of its institutions, which, at a certain period, seemed to demonstrate quite effective work? When did the realization come that they are not coping and perhaps are doing more harm than good?
Well, when this realization came, I think it was after 2007, after the famous speech by the Russian president in Munich. That's how I assess it, because when all this incorrectness led to China becoming the second largest economy. China today accounts for 20% of the GDP. And when Russia, which suffered a fiasco after 1991, in 2007, the head of the Russian state comes to Munich and talks about making Yalta today with me, making this public statement when he is not being listened to. He goes into a 5-day war in neighboring Georgia and does whatever he wants. And again, instead of punishing him, they make a deal with him called Reset. They sign an agreement with him in 2009 for Nord Stream 1. This is precisely Barack Obama Biden. This is the whole left liberal ideology. And Hillary Clinton and the entire team. And appetite comes with eating. And after that, the annexation of Crimea, the carnage in Donbass. That is, all this happened precisely then because the policy of containment, which in relation to this type of empires, whether it be Germany after World War I, there was also a policy of containment. In 1933, Hitler came to power. In 1936, the Olympic Games were held in Berlin. In 2014, the Olympic Games were in Sochi. I remind you these parallels. 1938, the Munich Agreement, the Minsk Agreements, 2014. That is, we brought you peace, which Chamberlain and Daladier here, in the same way it was the French president and Angela Merkel. That is, we brought peace. At whose expense? At the expense of the Sudetenland. And here, at the expense of Ukraine, history repeats itself. Kulichevsky, a pre-revolutionary Russian historian, said, history is not taught. History punishes for not knowing the lesson in history. Apparently, these European officials still haven't studied this history. So you ask when this started. From my point of view, it started then. And unfortunately, very many. In the post-Soviet space, as if a more educated audience should be, especially if it's the political establishment, as if they are stepping on the same rake. Therefore, it is very important to understand this and be prepared for it.
Our program is already close to its conclusion, but I cannot help but ask, even though you touched on this topic, it seems to me that it is very important, both in the history of Azerbaijan's international relations and in general, considering the development of our ties with the region. This is the Middle East, Turkey, Israel, and the events happening in Syria. Undoubtedly, Syria has probably become the place where the confrontation between Israel and Turkey has become most real. And here, the role of Azerbaijan is interesting, as President Aliyev mentioned when answering questions from forum participants. At Ardea University, and this was also mentioned by the military and political leadership of Turkey, and the Israeli side also noted the role of Azerbaijan as an important mediator, let's say. in the relations between Turkey and Israel. This was also a few years ago when there was a certain crisis, but then we saw that President Erdogan met with Prime Minister Netanyahu precisely in the United States, in New York, and it seemed that they were moving towards normalizing relations. Now the situation is repeating, and again we see that Azerbaijan is trying to make its contribution, and it seems to be succeeding if the participants are noting Azerbaijan's role. What does this give Azerbaijan in the first place? What does this give to these Middle Eastern countries? And why are we now seeing such increased interest from Azerbaijan in the Middle East region? In particular, within the framework of the Anatolian Diplomatic Forum, we saw a meeting between the president of Azerbaijan and Azerbaijan. The interim leader of Syria, Ashara, why is this happening now? What interest might we have in the Middle East?
If the Shusha Declaration, and if our first military strategic political partner is Turkey, then we must be active in the geography, in the territory where Turkey is actively working, just as Turkey must be active in the territory where Azerbaijan is located. We can benefit our ally just as our ally can benefit us. And where you cannot be strong, power against power. And therefore, naturally, in the north-south direction, I mean the Russian-Iranian direction, having no such a strategic partner as Turkey strengthens Azerbaijan's position in this geography. Turkey's success in the Middle East, as President Trump noted, literally 3 days ago, while receiving Benjamin Netanyahu, was a very good message. I heard this for the first time when he took it there, saying that I called. Guide to President of Turkey Erdogan from K. Congratulated him on achieving what no one in Syria had accomplished in 2,000 years. Although he says did not admit this to me because he is a smart person, that's what President Rab said, and turns to Bibi. If you behave wisely, I will help you adjust the situation with Turkey. This month, he is interested in good relations between Israel and Turkey. If he is interested in good relations between Israel and Turkey, for all those who will work towards this goal, in this direction, they will enjoy the favor of the current administration of the United States of America, because you can want many things while sitting in Washington, but you cannot ignore and not use the services of those who live in this geography. Therefore, this geography is the best of all. Only Azerbaijan can play this game. And I have no doubt that behind the scenes, these processes are underway, and Azerbaijan is actively participating in them. You ask, what does this give to Azerbaijan? This gives Azerbaijan enormous international authority, because if this is happening behind the scenes, ultimately, the people who are behind the scenes go to the offices of those who make political decisions. In Washington, in Israel, in Turkey, and in other centers that will determine, that's a lot, a polar world. If Azerbaijan is there and Azerbaijan behaves quite wisely in this whole situation, do you really think that everything is decided today by the 5 permanent member countries of the Security Council, the nuclear powers? Do you think it's just like that? The president of Turkey has been declaring for many years that the world does not depend on these countries. The world is more than 5. Therefore, definitely, if in this geography today, Azerbaijan is the leader of this geography, and you need to have your positions in this geography. I think no one in this geography, without considering the interests of the Turkey-Azerbaijan tandem, whether it be the United States, the European Union, or China, will be able to enter here. Therefore, the more we demonstrate this behind the scenes, the better they will understand and respect our interests.
And the final question I can't help but ask. Several times during our interview, you mentioned the ideology that Azerbaijan had, which was to return Karabakh. Now Karabakh has already been returned, Karabakh is already being revived. What is our current ideology? How important is it? And how will it shape our society in the coming years?
I recall in this context when at a forum in Shusha, the president was asked a question about the national ideology of Azerbaijan. And he, quite frankly, for a politician, quite frankly said, I alone cannot decide this issue. This should be decided by the entire Azerbaijani society. Yes, I have more responsibility than anyone, but the Azerbaijani society must prepare this and it must emerge. Now we must discuss this with you. Society must discuss it. It must be at all levels. Because if we make the foundation reinforced concrete, and this is very important, because if the foundation is rotten tomorrow, any wind, and from this building, even if it is the most beautiful, nothing will remain. There is form, there is content, according to Plato. Therefore, We need substance. We have this foundation today. Now, how will we proceed further? Just recently I told you, what is Azerbaijani whole? I think a lot of attention needs to be paid to education. A lot of attention should be paid specifically to education because it is the foundation of the state. I haven't even mentioned all the other areas. It was not by chance that during my last visit, I gave 3 lectures at Kazar University. I am ready to give these lectures at other universities in Azerbaijan because the generation that helped us, my generation, to save face and helped, went and liberated. This is Karabakh along with a representative of my generation because we couldn't achieve it back then. After the first Karabakh war, they will be the masters of this country. Therefore, we must understand what kind of country we are leaving them and what kind of country they should build. Moreover, this is just now being formed. From my point of view, today is when this content should be formed. I believe the role of both my generation and the future representatives of our people is important here. Another matter is that we, as a whole society, must decide. And today, we must pay great attention to geography, historical prerequisites, and the prospects of how this world will develop. Therefore, if before, for example, we are now speaking with you in Russian, right? Well, it would be nice if many of our representatives would speak other languages just as well, that is both English and French. And I am very pleased that I recently mentioned the importance of systematic approach in Azerbaijan. I noticed, having worked all my life, as a manager, that there are tasks and they need to be managed. I am essentially doing this today in America as well. Therefore, it was very important for me to notice how it is structured here. A theater begins with a coat rack, right? And the country begins with an airport, with infrastructure. And I noticed this at the forum in Shusha. I saw it now, and I can imagine how it was at COP29, such a small country, 70,000, and it works like clockwork. This means that at a systemic level, we can do this. This means there is already a system. If there is a system at this level, if there's a system at the military technical level, then the issue of national security, the issue of the state, borders, independence, sovereignty, that we can protect this foundation, it indicates that the system is established. Now we need to build the education system and all other issues in the same systematic way. This is very important because we all need to understand what kind of Azerbaijan we are building. I think we are simply participating in this, shaping it. It's just that we need to approach this very responsibly. And the role of my generation here might be even more important because the younger generation doesn't know all the things that perhaps we know. But we have a bit of an ailment. It remained from the Soviet Union. Therefore, we must understand that everything that was there, we should take only the good from there if it pertains to primary education. Again, I am an advocate for the language issue being very important and resolved, meaning at the primary level, because everyone should speak our language fluently. For me, it was important living in America to preserve the Azerbaijani language. I lived there for 20 years and there were no Azerbaijanis around me at all. I had to watch our television from morning till night to hear the language, to preserve my language. And if we live in this country, it is very important. That is, it is essential to maintain your own language and also to develop other languages. If, for example, I achieved success in the Russian-speaking space, why? Because there was a void there. 300 million people speak Russian on the planet, but a huge number also speak English. The Armenians are strong there. In French, the Armenians are strong there, and not only them. Those who do not like our independence are strong there. Therefore, we must prepare a generation of new Azerbaijanis who will go there and push out all the adversaries of Azerbaijan and show the true face of Azerbaijan as it is today. Just these forums, 80 people came, 70,000 came to COP29. Well, it should not only be after people come here, but it should be precisely when a representative of our country presents all this in their beautiful language, conveying our point of view to them. And of course, in this way, we will expand our influence on everything that represents the state interest of Azerbaijan.
Thank you very much. This is a very good forecast. Let's hope that it will be so. And this year, it marks 5 years since the domestic war, and the processes that are happening truly inspire only optimism and hope that with each passing year, it will only get better, calmer, and the world will be a slightly, even if just a little, better place than it was before. Thank you very much once again for this discussion.
Thank you for the invitation. Take care.
Thank you. Many thanks to our viewers. I remind you that this was a special Saturday broadcast on the CBC channel. See you next time.